This isn't the hood, ma'am. You don't just stroll in here wearing whatever you like and expect a seat in the premium lounge. Jason Miller's voice rang out like a slap, sharp, smug, and soaked in condescension. Selene Carter paused mid-step, her Louboutin heels clicking once against the marble floor, before going still. She had just arrived at Westchester County Airport, fresh off a transatlantic business deal, the kind that would make front-page headlines in any financial journal. But none of that mattered to Jason. He took one look at her, a black woman in a tailored charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, her locks pulled into a low bun, and decided she did not belong. His judgment wasn't subtle. It was immediate, deliberate, and delivered with the confidence of someone who had made the same assumption too many times before. "I'll call security if you don't back off now," he added, arms crossed as he blocked the entrance to the lounge. "This area is reserved for first-class passengers and high-tier members, not tourists with attitude problems." Behind her, the rain began falling harder, drumming against the terminal windows like an approaching war drum. Inside, the lounge lighting glowed golden and warm, just beyond Jason's shoulder. An inviting luxury turned into a wall of exclusion. Selene stood at its threshold, her breath steady, her face unreadable. She could have responded with anger. She could have told him exactly who she was, the owner of the airline, the person who signed the checks for the very space he was guarding. But she didn't. Not yet. The insult had already sliced deep, not because it was original. She had heard worse in boardrooms, masked with fake courtesy, but because of how effortless it was in Jason's mouth. He said it with the ease of someone who had said it before, who meant it and who had never been corrected. The look in his eyes didn't change, even as she stood motionless. That, more than the words themselves, was what made her blood quietly boil. But Selene did not show it. She simply looked Jason in the eye, then down at the platinum card still unused in her hand, and breathed in the cold airport air. Steady, quiet, calculating. "Where are you watching from today?" That's the first question I'll ask you, because some of you will hear Jason's words and remember your own story. And some of you might recognize Jason's tone, not in a stranger, but in a teacher, a supervisor, a colleague, or even a family member. The familiarity of that tone is what hurts the most, because it tells you, before you've even said a word, that you are not welcome. Selene knew that tone. She had faced it too many times before. But today she would answer it not with protest, but with power. Jason Miller extended his hand slowly, with the kind of performative sigh that made it sound like Selene was wasting his precious time. "Fine," he muttered. "If you really must, let me see your documents." Selene Carter, calm and focused, reached into her slim clutch and handed him a black platinum executive card and her boarding pass. Her movements were smooth, unbothered, and controlled. Not rushed, not anxious, not apologetic. Jason took them between two fingers, holding them like they were damp receipts from a cheap deli. He squinted at the card, then lifted it high toward the fluorescent light overhead, turning it left and right as if examining some counterfeit relic. "These look odd," he said, dragging out the words. "Never seen this version before. Are you sure you didn't get these through, I don't know, some kind of promotion?" Selene's expression remained composed. "This card is part of the Bennett Aviation Executive Access Program," she replied, her tone crisp and professional. "It's valid. Both are." But Jason barely listened. He was already forming his own narrative. "Look," he said coldly, lowering the documents but still not returning them. "For our guests' safety, I'm going to need to verify these with our system. You'll need to wait outside until I confirm your status." His hand gestured lazily toward the large glass doors behind her. It wasn't just a routine instruction. It was a dismissal, and the way he said "our guests" made it clear. He didn't consider her one of them. Selene blinked once. "It's raining," she said quietly. Jason smirked. "Then you might want to find cover. Lounge policy's lounge policy." The doors closed behind her with a hydraulic hiss. Outside, the cold hit like a slap, and the rain had turned from drizzle to a steady downpour. Water spotted Selene's coat almost immediately, darkening the fabric. She didn't huddle or flinch. She just stood under the narrow awning, her arms crossed, watching the reflections on the glass blur from the rain. Inside, she could still see Jason, warm, dry, smug, looking at a screen, pretending to verify her credentials. But what struck her wasn't just the cold. It was what happened next. An older white man in a navy blue blazer walked up to the same entrance she'd been blocked from. Jason stood up, smiled broadly, and waved him in. "Mr. Patterson, your flight's ready. Please come right in." No ID check, no card held to the light, no suspicion, just open arms. Then came a white woman in a pantsuit. Same thing. Jason barely looked at her pass. She breezed through the doors like royalty. Another white couple followed. Same treatment. Selene stood still as each one walked past her, ignoring her entirely. To them, she wasn't a fellow traveler. She was furniture. Or worse, an inconvenience, a mistake, something that didn't belong in their curated world of comfort and privilege. 25 minutes passed before Jason returned. When he did, he didn't look ashamed. He didn't apologize. He opened the door just enough to step outside and handed back the card like it offended him to touch it. "Since the weather's gotten worse," he said, voice flat, "I'll allow you to come in, but we'll be keeping an eye on you. Please don't disturb our other guests." His eyes darted away before she could answer. Selene took her card in silence, her gaze unwavering. She stepped past him into the lounge, soaked and freezing, but with a spine of steel. She didn't wipe her coat, didn't shake off the rain. She let it cling to her like armor. No one else in the lounge looked up. No one asked why she'd been left outside for nearly half an hour. No one noticed how the same woman who helped build the foundation of this airline was being treated like a stranger at her own doorstep. But Selene noticed. Every detail, every choice, every moment of silence. She saw it all and took it in, because this wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning. The lounge smelled of jasmine oil and fresh espresso, but Selene Carter could only feel the chill soaking through her damp coat. As she walked past the polished leather chairs and marble coffee tables, all eyes seemed to look through her, not at her. She chose a seat in the far corner, silent and composed, but Jason Miller's gaze followed her like a security camera. He leaned toward the front desk attendant beside him and whispered just loud enough for Selene to hear, "Keep an eye on that one. She looks out of place." The words were intentional, not subtle, not coded, just clear. To him, Selene wasn't a first-class passenger. She was a problem, a risk. A black woman sitting alone in luxury, that alone was suspicious. Jason didn't believe someone like her could belong, not without a white husband, a security detail, or someone else to vouch for her presence. In his mind, Selene was only here because something had slipped through the cracks. Selene sat with her back straight, watching the rain run in jagged lines down the tall windows. She said nothing, but her mind recorded everything. She could feel the discomfort in the room, not hers but theirs. Her presence disrupted the picture-perfect illusion of wealth and whiteness that this lounge tried to maintain. No one offered a smile. No one asked if she needed anything. She was invisible and yet heavily monitored, like an artifact no one trusted. Jason returned to his computer, pretending to work, but his eyes flicked to Selene every few seconds. His jaw clenched tighter with each glance. He wasn't just suspicious. He was angry that she hadn't broken under the pressure. Angry that she didn't look nervous, apologetic, or afraid. To him, her calm was arrogance. Her silence was defiance, and he hated it. Mia Collins, a young attendant barely 2 months into her job, stood behind the counter pretending to organize papers. She had seen it all. The way Jason had treated Selene at the door. The way he beamed at white passengers and became ice with her. Mia's stomach turned as she remembered the moment Selene was left outside in the rain, while others waltzed in unchecked. She wanted to say something, but Jason had already warned her once about interfering. So she stayed silent, her eyes flickering to Selene, then quickly away. Minutes passed. The air inside the lounge remained thick with quiet hostility. Then Jason rose from his desk and strode across the room. He stopped a few feet from Selene's chair and bent slightly as if speaking to someone dangerous but unpredictable. "Let me be absolutely clear," he said, voice low but firm. "We're watching you. Any suspicious behavior, and I won't hesitate to call security. I don't care what kind of documents you have." Selene slowly turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried a weight that made the nearby guests subtly shift in their seats. "Do you say this to all your guests?" she asked, her tone razor sharp. "Or only the ones who look like me?" Jason froze. His lips parted, but no words came out for a second. The silence stretched. Then with a sneer, he straightened his back and said coldly, "I do this for anyone who looks like trouble." And just like that, he turned on his heel and walked away. Selene's eyes didn't follow him. She sat motionless, letting his words settle into the space like a foul smell. Around her, no one spoke. No one intervened. The lounge returned to its usual hush, soft jazz in the background, the smell of cinnamon pastries wafting from the bar, but the tension sat thick in the air. Every eye that avoided hers was another silent accomplice. Every silence felt like a verdict. Selene wasn't surprised. This wasn't her first encounter with prejudice, but it was the first time she experienced it in a place she had built, a place where her signature still hung in the executive hallway. And that betrayal, cut deeper than all the rest. Selene Carter sat still, her hands folded on her lap, the raindrops on her coat now forming dark, heavy patches against the tailored fabric. She could feel eyes flicking toward her, the room vibrating with a quiet discomfort that no one dared name. Across the lounge, a couple whispered softly, stealing glances in her direction. A man 2 seats away shifted uneasily, clearly aware something wasn't right, but like everyone else, he stayed silent. That was the poison in rooms like this. No one yelled, no one threatened, but silence became its own accomplice. And the longer it stretched, the louder it echoed in Selene's mind. Suddenly, a rustle of movement caught her attention. An older white man, mid-60s, rose from a corner seat and walked slowly toward the center of the room. His blazer bore a stitched Bennett aviation crest, the kind given only to frequent elite members. He cleared his throat with intention, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Excuse me," he said, turning toward the front desk. "Why was that woman made to stand outside for so long while others walked in freely?" The room froze. Jason, caught off guard behind the desk, opened his mouth to respond but hesitated. "We were verifying credentials," he muttered. The man didn't blink. "I saw at least 3 passengers walk in without a single check." That single sentence hit the room like a dropped glass. For the first time, the spell of complicit silence cracked. A few heads turned. A young woman near the espresso station glanced up, her brows tightening. 2 men near the windows looked at each other, then toward Selene. No one said anything just yet, but the air had changed. Jason flushed and turned away, pretending to adjust something on his screen. Behind him, Mia Collins stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had never heard anyone challenge Jason out loud. That man's voice gave her something she didn't expect to feel today: permission. Selene's eyes met the man's for just a second. He gave her a slow, respectful nod before returning to his seat. No words were exchanged, but something in her chest shifted. Not relief, not vindication, but a crack in the wall, a sliver of light. Another voice followed, softer this time. "It didn't look right," said a middle-aged black woman sitting nearby. "I've seen it too many times." A murmur rippled across the room, faint but real. It wasn't a riot, it wasn't a rebellion, but it was something. And in a place built on image, on manners, on quiet power, even a whisper could feel like thunder. Jason, now visibly rattled, stepped into the back office for a moment, maybe to collect himself, maybe to call someone. Whatever the reason, his absence was a temporary vacuum, and in that gap, truth began to bloom. Selene remained silent. She wasn't there to perform, but she listened, carefully. Her silence now carried weight, more than any shouted rebuttal ever could. Every second she sat upright and unbothered, she reclaimed space that had been denied to her. At the edge of the room, Mia Collins finally took a step forward. She didn't speak, didn't do anything dramatic, but she walked to Selene's side, offered her a towel, and held it there quietly until Selene took it. That small gesture said more than any apology. Mia didn't look Jason's way. She didn't need permission anymore. Selene looked at her, nodded once, not in thanks, but in recognition. A moment between 2 women, 2 layers of experience, one long endured, one just beginning to understand. The lounge hadn't erupted. But it had shifted. The illusion of neutral silence had cracked. Not everyone had spoken, but everyone had heard. And Selene knew the current was turning. Not enough to change everything. Not yet. But the silence was no longer on their side. Selene Carter stood slowly, the towel Mia had offered now resting neatly on the side table. Her eyes swept across the lounge, calm, deliberate, but filled with a quiet fire that burned beneath the surface. She had watched enough, heard enough, tolerated enough, and now it was time to speak. The air shifted the moment she cleared her throat. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Cups halted halfway to mouths. Even the quiet jazz seemed to lower its volume, as though the room itself braced for what was coming. "I don't typically do this," Selene began, her voice firm but controlled. "But I believe today's lesson needs to be public." She stepped forward, her wet coat trailing faint prints on the polished floor. "My name is Selene Carter. I'm not just a first-class passenger. I'm the CEO of Bennett Aviation. I own 28% of this company. And for over 10 years, I have quietly built the very systems that pay for this lounge, this aircraft, and even the salaries of the people who tried to deny me entry." A collective intake of breath followed. Silence gripped the room tighter than before. But this time, it was not rooted in ignorance. It was the sound of shame sinking in. At the front desk, Jason reappeared just in time to catch her last sentence. His face paled, his lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Vanessa Quinn, still standing stiff behind the glass doors leading to the boarding area, blinked hard as though trying to process what she had just heard. But even then, her pride resisted the truth. Her lips tightened, her jaw clenched. She still refused to believe a black woman, one who didn't fit her pristine image of power, could actually be the boss. Selene continued, "Every insult spoken today, every doubt you cast on me, was not just disrespectful, it was dangerous. Because if someone like me, with this level of authority, can be treated like a criminal at her own company, then what happens to those with no title? What happens to passengers who don't have the luxury of a public voice?" Her words rang out, heavy and precise, each one landing like a gavel against stone. The guilt on the staff's faces was unmistakable now. Even the guests, many of whom had remained silent, lowered their eyes. Still, Jason found his voice, barely. I didn't know. I had no idea who you were," he stammered, attempting to offer some thread of defense. Selene turned toward him, expression unreadable. "That's not the problem," she said coldly. "The problem is, you thought you knew who I wasn't." Vanessa finally spoke, though her voice cracked under the weight of her own stubborn disbelief. "There's no way. I mean, if you were the CEO, wouldn't someone have told us? Wouldn't you have had someone escort you or security or—" Her words trailed off as she realized how absurd they sounded. Selene didn't bother responding. She let Vanessa drown in her own question. The lounge was now dead silent. No one sipped coffee. No one typed on laptops. Every eye was on the woman they had ignored, the woman who owned the sky they were about to fly through. Selene took one last look around the room, not to gloat, but to etch every face into memory. "I didn't come here to make a scene," she said. "I came to board my flight in peace. But your assumptions, your biases, your casual cruelty made that impossible. I will not be quiet anymore. Not here. Not in my own house." And with that, she turned and walked toward the private gate, her footsteps slow, steady, and soaked with power. Each one echoed through the lounge like a metronome of reckoning. Behind her, no one moved, because now everyone knew exactly who she was. The storm outside had calmed slightly, but inside the terminal, tension only thickened. Selene Carter did not speak as she stepped through the doors toward the private boarding zone. She did not look back at the stunned faces behind her. Her heels struck the polished floor with quiet authority. Each step, though measured, felt like a countdown. A silence heavier than words blanketed the room. She was done debating. Now she would act. Halfway down the corridor, she pulled her phone from her coat pocket. Calm, precise. With a swift tap, she launched an app most people in the company did not even know existed. It was a proprietary tool built exclusively for the executive board of Bennett Aviation. A secure interface, facial recognition, Emergency override protocol. Her thumbprint unlocked the full dashboard, revealing real-time access to surveillance feeds, employee logs, flight status, and incident tracking. She tapped a button labeled Protocol Aegis. Instantly, the screen changed. A new prompt asked, "Do you wish to escalate to command-level review?" Without hesitation, she pressed yes. A second later, the call connected. Voice only, encrypted. "Ryan Hughes," came a voice on the other end, Director of Security Operations. "Ryan," Selene said evenly, "I need you to pull all internal and external camera footage from Westchester County Terminal, starting from 45 minutes ago until now. Lock down all data access. Flag it for C-suite review only." Ryan's tone shifted immediately. "Understood, Miss Carter. Are you safe?" "I am," she replied, "but the company's culture is not. This will be a full-scale audit." "Understood. Dispatching my team now." Selene ended the call without another word. The screen dimmed. The silence returned. Meanwhile, back in the lounge, Jason shifted nervously at the counter. He glanced around but didn't see Selene anymore. That worried him more than if she had stayed to argue. People like her, he thought, still trying to convince himself she was bluffing, did not just walk out quietly after that kind of humiliation, unless they were preparing something far bigger. Vanessa Quinn stood by the boarding gate, arms crossed tightly, her mouth dry. A slight tremor moved through her fingers, but she kept her jaw clenched. "She's not going to do anything," she whispered to Jason, half to herself. "She's just trying to scare us." But the words lacked conviction, and her voice cracked at the end. Jason didn't reply. He was staring at the clock now, measuring time in heartbeats. Every tick echoed in his chest. For the first time, he realized the worst thing Selene could do was not scream or threaten. It was exactly what she was doing now. Nothing. That quiet, chilling nothing. Because it meant control. Selene reached the waiting area near the jet. The glass walls around her reflected a still image of a poised, powerful woman, one whose dignity had been tested, but not broken. She took a seat near the base of the boarding stairs, not to rest, to observe. Her phone remained in her hand, unlocked. She wasn't rushing. She was listening, calculating. Vanessa kept checking over her shoulder. Every minute Selene stayed silent added weight to the unknown. Jason tried to return to his computer, but found himself staring blankly at the screen. He couldn't focus, couldn't breathe properly. His mind ran wild with possibilities. Could she really be the CEO? Could that call actually change anything? And if so, how much time did they have left? They didn't realize that the timer had already started. Selene hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't called security. She hadn't demanded apologies. But in the span of just 10 minutes, she had begun dismantling everything they thought they controlled. Not with rage, but with readiness, with reach, with systems quietly obeying her touch. And in that quiet was the loudest threat they had ever faced. The moment the first member of the corporate security team stepped into the lounge, everything changed. He wore a tailored navy suit, an earpiece coiled discreetly under one collar, and a sleek ID badge that caught Jason's eye instantly. Behind him, two others followed. Calm, composed, no wasted movement. This was not the usual airport security. This was internal enforcement from the top, and their presence sent a silent ripple through the lounge that felt louder than a siren. Jason stood frozen. Vanessa's arms, still crossed, began to tighten across her chest. Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice rising an octave too high. The lead officer didn't answer her. Instead, he walked straight to the front counter, tapped the terminal, and keyed in a code only executive staff would recognize. Jason's screen flickered, then went black, then rebooted him, but this time in override mode. The Bennett Aviation seal pulsed in the center, red instead of its usual blue. A corporate lockdown had begun. "Jason Miller," the officer said, finally speaking, "you are to step away from the terminal immediately." Jason blinked. I work here. I'm the operations manager. What's going on?" The officer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You've been flagged for procedural misconduct. All activity at this location is now under review." Jason's mouth went dry. The color drained from his face. Behind him, whispers flared up among passengers. A few took out their phones. No one dared record yet, but everyone knew something was unraveling. Vanessa backed away instinctively, only to find another officer already waiting near the boarding gate. "Ma'am," he said, "please stay where you are." "I don't understand," she snapped. "Who gave you authority to intervene?" A pause, then, with calm finality, "The CEO." That word hit like a brick wall. From her seat near the aircraft, Selene could see the shift happening, not through noise, but in the stillness. In the way people moved differently now, slower, more cautious. The weight of truth was finally sinking in. And this was only the beginning. She stood up again, walking back toward the lounge doors, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to see it unfold with her own eyes. Passengers parted as she approached. Some looked down, others gave her small nods. A young woman near the corner, the same one who had offered her a towel, offered a tight, relieved smile. One man murmured, "Good for her." Another, older, simply muttered, "About time." It wasn't applause, it wasn't spectacle, but it was solidarity. And that meant more. Inside, Jason had finally stepped aside. One officer stood by him, tablet in hand, reviewing logs. The other began gathering employee statements. Vanessa stood motionless, eyes darting toward the exit, as if wondering if she could still walk away clean. But it was far too late. Her silence was no longer power, it was evidence. Selene entered without a word. The entire room fell into a hush, deeper than before. Jason tried to open his mouth, but the lead officer raised one hand, not to silence Selene, but to silence him. "Miss Carter," the officer said respectfully, "all protocols are now under executive control." She nodded once, then looked at Jason, then at Vanessa. Neither of them could meet her gaze. "You wanted to know who I was," she said quietly. "Now the whole system will know who you are." She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. But her voice carried farther than any loudspeaker. And in that stillness, Jason and Vanessa finally began to understand. They weren't being watched anymore. They were being recorded, remembered, and held accountable. Within hours, the footage made its way to the surface. A single clip, no longer than 23 seconds, showed Selene Carter being stopped, scrutinized, and dismissed by two employees in uniforms bearing the logo of her own company. That was all it took. By noon, the video had crossed 10 million views. By nightfall, it was the top trending topic on every platform: Twitter, Reddit, LinkedIn. The hashtags Chak Selene Speaks, Chak Aviation Justice, and Chamarlashi Shame at the Gate surged like wildfire. And with each retweet, each outraged comment, the weight of public reckoning grew. News outlets scrambled for the story. Some ran headlines that read like apologies. CEO denied her own jet because she was black. Others leaned into outrage. Racism at 35,000 feet, when power isn't enough. Within 24 hours, anchors were debating systemic bias in aviation on national television. Industry analysts were forced to address what had long been whispered about: the unspoken hierarchy of appearance, race, and class in airline service. The truth had always been there, but now it had a face and a name. Bennett Aviation stock took an immediate hit. Investors panicked at first, not because of Selene's actions, but because of what the incident revealed about the company's internal culture. Whispers spread among shareholders. If this could happen to her, what else have we missed? Selene didn't panic. She released a measured statement, just 21 words long. "Our systems failed. Our silence failed. I will make sure this never happens again." That sentence alone was quoted in every business journal and picked up by law school case studies within 48 hours. More than a scandal, it became a litmus test. CEOs across industries were called out. Would you be brave enough to fire your own managers on the tarmac? Company boards issued internal audits overnight. Airlines hastily scheduled bias training and customer experience reviews. But none of them had what Selene had: proof, poise, and purpose. She had made no threats, no press tours, just results. Quiet, lethal, undeniable. Inside the aviation world, everything cracked open. Flight crews whispered about the Selene Protocol, an unofficial nickname for a complete review process, sparked by one woman's silence. HR departments across the country began pulling tapes, checking logs and reevaluating procedures. Staff who once felt untouchable now walked on eggshells, wondering how many of their past mistakes were quietly archived, just waiting for the right storm. And still, Selene said little. She didn't need to. Her actions were echoing louder than any headline. The very structure of corporate oversight began to shift. Several advocacy groups, some dormant for years, reignited under the spotlight of her case. Congress members began requesting meetings. Civil rights attorneys quoted her in hearings. Her name became shorthand for one question boardrooms could no longer avoid. What happens when the person you disrespect owns the building? What began as a single moment of injustice had become a cultural reckoning, and the world now watched what Selene Carter would do next. The media begged her for a press conference. Cameras lined up outside corporate headquarters. Anchors speculated what she would say. But Selene Carter remained silent until the following Monday morning. At precisely 9 o'clock, she stepped onto the small stage of Bennett Aviation's main hall. No entourage, no flashing lights, just her, wearing the same calm strength that had carried her through the storm. Her eyes scanned the hundreds of employees seated in front of her. Behind them, the live-stream broadcast reached thousands more. She spoke without a script, without teleprompters, only truth. "This isn't just about me," she began. "This is about every passenger who has ever been doubted because of how they look, every customer who has been spoken down to, every employee who was told to keep quiet or look the other way. I am not standing here because I was disrespected. I am standing because too many others couldn't." The room fell silent. Her words rang out, not in volume, but in clarity. "We built this company on the promise of excellence, but excellence means nothing if it's only offered to some." Her gaze settled on the senior staff seated in the front row. Some looked away, others nodded solemnly. "From this day forward," she continued, "let it be known, no one, and I mean no one, will be denied dignity in this space again." She paused, letting the weight of that promise sink in. Then she added, "We're not just changing policies. We're changing how we define professionalism, what we accept as leadership, who we believe deserves trust." Behind her, a massive screen lit up with 5 words. "Dignity is not a privilege." The phrase would be reposted, printed, quoted across newsrooms and universities for weeks to come. Selene's message didn't end there. She called on employees to not just witness change, but to be it. If you see someone being treated unfairly, speak. If you know of bias, name it. If you feel the weight of silence, break it. Her voice did not rise, but it carried across every heart in the room. People listened, not because they had to, but because they could feel the truth behind every syllable. She ended simply. No drama, no crescendo. "Let this not be remembered as the day we fell short," she said. "Let this be remembered as the day we chose to rise together." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was steady, standing, tearful, real. And from that moment on, her words began to echo, not just in boardrooms and hangars, but in conversations between strangers, in quiet moments between colleagues, and in every corner of an industry forced to look at itself differently. It was no longer just Selene's voice. It was a movement. Selene Carter did not stop after the apology. That moment at the podium wasn't closure. It was ignition. In the weeks that followed, Bennett Aviation underwent the most radical transformation in its history. A third-party whistleblower hotline was launched, fully anonymous and monitored by an independent ethics board. Every employee, from gate agents to C-suite, was required to undergo a bias intervention training designed not just to inform, but to challenge. It wasn't a check-the-box seminar. It was uncomfortable, honest, necessary. Selene also approved the integration of an advanced AI tool, trained to detect prejudice, language, and microaggressions across emails, chat systems, and internal communications. "Technology doesn't flinch," she told her team, "and it doesn't protect ego." The system ran silently, flagging patterns invisible to human eyes, not to punish, but to reform. Patterns were exposed. Conversations changed. People started thinking before speaking or typing. Those who had spoken up were not forgotten. Mia Collins, the young ramp agent who had apologized publicly in the heat of the moment, was promoted to Senior Customer Care Manager. Selene made it clear why. Mia represents what this company will be, not what it was. Lucas Parker, the hesitant but morally grounded supervisor, was elevated to Regional Service Director. His job, ensure no team under his watch ever repeated what had happened in Westchester. Lucas accepted the role with visible emotion, his silence now replaced by steady purpose. Vanessa Quinn, once the face of arrogance, did something no one expected. Months later, a handwritten letter arrived at Selene's desk. In it, Vanessa confessed to her prejudice, not as a moment of weakness, but as a lifelong blind spot she had never confronted. "You gave me a mirror," she wrote, "and for the first time I looked in it and didn't like what I saw. It was raw, humble, real." Selene didn't ignore it. Instead, she invited Vanessa to join the company's new peer-led training program, not as an instructor, but as a voice, a cautionary story from someone who once stood on the wrong side of the line. 6 months after the incident, Bennett Aviation was no longer just an airline. It was a case study. Harvard Business School published a paper titled, "When the CEO Was Denied Her Seat, A Corporate Reckoning." Major firms followed suit, creating executive listening forums and response units. Selene was invited to testify before Congress, where she delivered a 10-minute speech that would be quoted for years. "Power without purpose is privilege. Power with purpose is change." The impact reached even further. Civil rights groups praised her actions. Industry boards began re-evaluating their hiring and evaluation metrics. Within a year, over 50 companies adopted Bennett Aviation's accountability model, not because they had to, but because they finally saw why they must. Then quietly, without announcement, Selene returned home. It was her father, William Carter's 70th birthday. The living room was warm, simple, filled with laughter and the scent of old books and fresh cornbread. When dinner ended, her father stood, proud, a little teary, and raised his glass. "Selene, you've taught this family and the world that dignity isn't given, it's demanded, and when demanded with grace and fire, it changes everything." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and embraced him. Outside the window, the sky was clear. No more storms. Only the dawn of something new. What began with cruelty had become a legacy, one built not from anger, but from conviction, from vision, from the kind of courage that doesn't shout, but reshapes the air around it. Selene Carter's name would not only be remembered for building an empire, it would be remembered for dismantling the prejudice that tried to deny her place in it, and for rebuilding something better in its wake.